This tutorial will help you to complete the questions on homework number 9. Let's take a look at the first topic on transforming formulas. Try not to be intimidated by the way the equations look and focus mostly on inverse operations. So in this question, it asks us to solve the formula for the letter L in terms of pi, t, and g. So that just means L on one side and pi, t, and g on the other side. So let's take a look at our formula. T is equal to 2 times pi times the square root of L divided by g. So if I want to get L by itself, I need to get rid of timesing by 2, timesing by pi, square rooting, and dividing by g. So I need to do the opposite of all of those operations. I need to do the opposite of timesing by 2 and timesing by pi. I have to do the opposite of the square root, and I have to do the opposite of dividing by g. So I'm going to start with finding the inverse of timesing by 2 and pi. So the inverse of that is dividing by 2 and pi. So over here I took the notes of what I saw, and in red I'm writing the inverse. So dividing by 2 pi leaves me with t over 2 pi equals the square root of L divided by g. Now let's do the inverse of square rooting. The inverse of square rooting is squaring. So now my sentence will be the quantity t over 2 pi squared equals L divided by g. Now for my last one, the opposite of dividing by g is multiplying by g. So I'm going to take this entire side and that entire side and multiply by g. That gives me g times t over 2 pi quantity squared is equal to L. So take a minute to look that over. Pause the video if you need. First step is identify the operations that were performed, and the second step is to do the inverse operation. Let's type this in our answer box. As you're typing, you may need to use some of these quick symbols here, or you can always open the keypad and find them in there as well. So I know we had g parentheses t divided by 2 pi, then close the parentheses, and then raise it to a power. You can either use the virtual keyboard or you can use the Shift 6 on your keypad. So we're going to submit our answer. And there you go. Let's try another problem. For this next question, we're going to transform the formula for the area of a trapezoid. They're asking us to rewrite the formula to solve for B1. That's pronounced B1. And this is a label. It's not math, and you do not need to separate these two items. The B and the 1 travel together as a whole term. The B and the 2 travel together as a whole term. They do not need to be separated because they're labels. They're not math. So if I want to get B1 by itself, the first thing I'm going to do is write my formula and identify all of the math that is happening to B1. So it's being multiplied by 1/2. It's being multiplied by h. So these are items that need to be divided. It is being added by B2. So that will need to be subtracted. So the first thing I'm going to do is the inverse of this here. Now typically when we're multiplying by 2 items, we would divide by both of them at the same time. But we don't divide by fractions. We don't divide by fractions. So instead of doing this math first, 2 at one time, I'm going to just do 1 at a time. So I'm going to clear my fraction of 1/2 by multiplying both sides by 2. I'm using brackets instead of parentheses because the problem already had parentheses and the right side is quite large. So 2a will be equal to, these are inverses, h times the quantity b1 plus b2. Now I can get rid of timesing by h. This time I'll divide. That leaves me with 2a divided by h equals b1 plus b2. Notice I don't write the parentheses this time. And the reason why I didn't write the parentheses is because I'm no longer multiplying anything. So the parentheses can disappear. The last step is to get rid of adding b2, so I'm going to subtract b2. Notice I don't separate the b and the 2, I simply write it as a single term. So 2a divided by h minus b2 is equal to b1. 2a over h minus b2. Let's type that in our answer box. Now don't forget, you might need to use some of these characters here. You can always use the virtual keypad if you were doing that. The virtual keypad also has the ability to when you're typing your answer, if you need to use a special character like B1 or B2, you'll find those down here below the answer line. Submit your answer, and let's take a look at one more problem. This is the same question as the last one, except this time this is the same question. Let's take a look at this question here for the volume of a cylinder. This one asks us to rewrite the formula to solve for h in terms of r and v. So the only thing I need to do is to identify what's happening to h by filling in these time signs. So I was timesing by pi and r squared. And the opposite of multiplying is dividing. None of these items are fractions, so I can divide by both of them at the same time. My answer will be v divided by pi r squared equals h. Now let's pretend that the problem said to solve for r. If the problem says to solve for r, then this is what the work would look like. R is being multiplied by pi and h, so I can certainly divide by them at the beginning. But then when I rewrite, I notice that my r has an exponent. So you remove an exponent of squaring by square rooting, and you would square root both sides of your equation, leaving you with the square root of the fraction v divided by pi h is equal to r. So that's not what this question was asking, but if I rewrote it, those are the two ways they could ask you to isolate this formula. Let's take a look at one last question. Now I know this question looks intimidating, but it is one of the most popular transforming formulas questions that I've seen on the Regents exam, so we definitely need to practice it. Now I have to say the math in this question is probably quite simple, but what makes this problem so difficult for students is how scary the terms look. So a lot of these terms have subscripts, like FG, M1, and M2. Remember, these are subscripts. They're not math. They are labels. So if you have more than one letter M, they need labels. This is the first M and this is the second M. This way, if they ask you to solve for M, you know which one they want you to get alone. These little subscripts never need to be separated from their main variables. So if you do something with this term, the whole term moves at once. So let's write this formula out. The fact that it's for the gravitational force between two objects really doesn't matter if you understand what the formula is. You simply need to be able to read it and identify the operations. So if we want to solve for r, then that means I need to understand that g is multiplying m1, which is multiplying m2, which is dividing by r squared. So I'm going to need to get rid of these timesings and these dividings and these powers. But the first thing I want to focus on is the fact that this r that I want to get by itself is in the denominator. And you can't have a variable in the denominator, so let's just remove it right from the beginning. My right side now has the letter r times the whole item, right? This is one term, the item fg. On the other side is g times m1 and m2. Now remember, our focus is r. So none of this matters to me right now, because r needs to be on one side and all of these items need to be on the other side. And 3 of them are already there. So the only thing I need to get rid of is timesing by fg and this power of 2. So I'm going to eliminate fg first by dividing by fg. That leaves me with r squared and this giant fraction on the other side. How do we get rid of a power of 2? The square is the inverse of a square root. So you simply put a giant square root sign over that whole fraction. Your answer will be r is equal to the square root of g times m1 times m2 divided by fg. That's it. All right, let's take a look at the other topics on the homework. The next 3 topics on the homework all have to do with solving linear inequalities. Now this is the same as solving an equality. The only difference is that this item here in the center is not an equal sign. It could be a greater than sign, it could be a less than sign, it could be a greater than or equal to, or a less than or equal to. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the one rule that states if you divide by a negative coefficient, if you divide by a negative coefficient, if you divide by a negative, you reverse the order. And the order is the direction in which this faces. So we're going to do all of our inverse operations and decide if we need to reverse our order when we get to the division step. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our z's on the same side. So I'm going to subtract 10z from both sides, giving me a negative 12z plus 10 is greater than 8. My next step will be to subtract 10 from both sides, and then I rewrite negative 12z is greater than negative 2. The last step is dividing. If you divide by a negative, which we are, we're going to take this greater than sign and we're going to reverse the direction. So z is less than positive 1/6. So pause the video if you need to. Type your solution and submit. Let's try another one. In this problem, we're going to get our k's on the same side first. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 7k from both sides. Now most of you know what to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve this problem differently so that you can see what happens if your k is on the right side or any variable. So if I was to subtract 2k, I would get negative 7 is less than 5k plus 6. My next math move would be to subtract 6 from both sides. And then my final math move would be to divide by 5. Now this is a correct answer, but that's not how this is set up. The input is set up so that k is first, and in our answer, k is last. So you have to understand that if you want to type this answer, which is backwards, into this answer, which is forwards, that you need to write this the opposite way. So negative 13/5 is less than k. And if we read it in reverse, we would be saying k is greater than negative 13/5. So if you were to type your answer here, you'd have to switch this to a greater than sign. I think I forgot my negative sign here. So I'll have to go back. That was a negative 13 divided by positive 5. All right, one more time. Now, I tend to like my variables on the left, and I prefer that because the answer has the variables on the left. So I'm going to subtract 6v from both sides here, giving me negative 2v minus 3 is greater than or equal to negative 5. I'm going to add 3 to both sides, giving me negative 2v is greater than or equal to negative 2. Now notice when I divide here, I'm dividing by a negative. Anytime I divide by a negative, I have to reverse the direction of my inequality. So we're going to type v is less than or equal to positive 1. We're going to type v is less than or equal to positive 1. The next two topics on the homework are similar to the first one, but the problems are a bit longer. The rules are still the same. For this first question here, I would need to do some distributing. And over here, I would need to do some combining. So I'm going to get 8 minus 4f minus 24 is less than or equal to 2f minus 6. Again, I need to do some combining over here. Negative 4f minus 16 is less than or equal to 2f minus 6. I'm going to subtract 2f from both sides. Because I'm running out of room, I'm also going to write that I'm going to add 16 to both sides. And you see I'm being fair. I have a cross out on the left and a cross out on the right. That leaves me with negative 6f is less than or equal to 10. And when I do my final step here of dividing by negative 6, remember I need to reverse the order because I'm dividing by a negative. So we're going to type f is greater than or equal to negative 5/3, right? I'm going to reduce that 10/6. F is greater than or equal to negative 5/3. Type that in and submit. The last section is the same topic, but you're practicing with fractions. So it's up to you whether you want to distribute first, if you want to clear the fractions at all, or just use your calculator. I think for me, I'm going to distribute first and get negative 3/4 x minus 12 plus 5/4 x is greater than or equal to negative 5x plus 1. I don't even think I want to multiply everybody by 4, even though I could, because these two can combine very quickly into a 2/4, right? Negative 3 and positive 5 makes 2, and 2/4 is 1/2. And 1/2 isn't that complicated for me to work with, so I think I'm going to leave it for now. I'm going to add 5x on both sides. I'm going to pick up my calculator, or you know what, I might even just change this into a decimal because it's not that, it's a pretty good looking fractional value. So here I'm going to add 12 to both sides, and then I'm going to divide by 5.5, and then I'm going to use my calculator to do that math. So 13 divided by 5.5 on my calculator is not pretty. So I think what I'm going to do is convert that back to a fraction on my calculator. Let me show you how. So I initially had 13 divided by 5.5. And I'm going to now go back up and highlight that number and press Math and choose number 1, which means convert to fraction. And it's not converting it to a fraction for me because I divided by a decimal. So if I go back to 13 divided by, and type here 5 1/2, there's the fraction that I want. So if you do the math with a decimal, it's not going to always turn it back. So 26 over 11 is what I'm going to type here. So I can say, let's go back here. X is greater than or equal to 26 over 11. So X is greater than or equal to 26 over 11. Now you might see a lot of symbols down here. These four at the end we're going to talk about later in the week, but this is for interval notation. So we can just type X is greater than or equal to 26 over 11. So you don't need to worry about any of these other keys, just the inequality symbols in the middle. Okay, good luck.